There are no signs that the Russia-Ukraine war is nearing the end as the conflict is on the brink of its one-year anniversary. The U.S. is warning that Ukraine needs more help than ever, but Republicans on the Hill aren't as keen on providing more aid.
You've been talking to sources on the Hill that tell you even if the Republicans were to do the politically just idiotic thing and cut off Zelensky and the freedom fighters in Ukraine, Biden's got things lined up to keep him going for quite some time.
Yeah, after Kevin McCarthy said before the speaker fight that he was no longer going to be a blank check for Ukraine. There was, of course, concerns both, especially in Kyiv, but also here in Washington in the White House, that they would have to wrestle to get money out of the Hill, and it wouldn't come as it has done over the course of the last year. But I've heard that they've primed the pump enough for a supply of weapons to Ukraine that would last through this year at least. The sort of time frame that I'm hearing people here in Washington are looking at is by November of 2024, because they assume that whoever runs against Joe Biden will run as the anti-Ukraine war candidate, saying we can't carry on supporting Ukraine, and that for the Ukrainians, if they can try to get as far as they are going to get by November of 2024, that's the realistic time frame. This year has been held out as the very important year, but nobody seems to think there's going to be in this stage of it, this spring, a major win, a decisive win, either by the Russians or by the Ukrainians, and that we're looking at a long grind over the course of this year, which is why NATO is going to have to carry on having these meetings with a whip round, effectively an auction, saying who can supply what.
Despite the uphill battle on the Hill, the White House is said to be preparing yet another aid package for Ukraine. That was an amazing discussion where Joe Scarborough puts his thumb on the scale there. Any talk whatsoever of prematurely ending aid to Ukraine is he was sort of suggesting is anti-American or something.
Even prematurely, I mean, even
and what
the
does
word
prematurely mean? There's no end. And as that reporter concedes, there's no end in sight. So how can you prematurely end something with no end date? Then that's just ending it ever. Yeah, it's never appropriate to cut off aid.
I was reading this great analysis, I wish I remember where. It was some kind of military person talking about how wars end. And that the point of war is to kind of assess you can either win a war outright, which we've all conceded that Ukraine is not able to do. So then the question is, whether the fighting is telling you something about your opponent's vulnerabilities in a way that changes the negotiations at the negotiating table. To the extent that that is not happening, that you're just drawing it out because you've got a mega superpower that's willing to endlessly give you weapons and supplies, then what is the point of the ongoing conflict? It's not like you're changing. Russia doesn't believe it has to give you more. Maybe it doesn't want to lose increasing amounts of resources as time goes on. But as far as resources go, Russia has more. Russia has the ability to beat Ukraine. So what is the actual goal here? And when you look at it that way, these conversations seem like they are, frankly, very cruel to the interests of Ukrainians, who are the ones who are having to suffer and die in these contexts and to the end of this conflict.
Yeah, and I think the commentators in that clip were being, frankly, very not kind to American taxpayers who are supporting this effort. It was very how dare you question or scrutinize whether this is a good use of your money? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. We have the right. The American taxpayers have the right to ask questions about how long this is going to go on. Yeah. And they were saying, well, no, this should be out of your control. This is something, you're not in the room where the decisions are being made. He also suggesting that Biden could do something regardless of what Republicans do, which that sounded to be a little bit like the Nord Stream kind of.
Right.
Like,
well, I mean, this is.
I think blow up pipelines with that being the accusation.
Yeah. Even the taxpayer issue aside, because as we all know, there's never any tab for wars. Right. And it kind of demonstrates what so many MMT people have been saying, which is that if the government wants to print money, as it were, to pay for things, it can. And it, by the way, can do that for social programs and anything else that it wants as well. It just chooses to do it. But the issue is that we live in a democracy, and our government's supposed to have a public democratic decision-making process about whether it does go to war, not endlessly fight proxy wars, which it claims are not actual wars with other superpowers, at the expense of another country and its citizens who are being used as cannon fodder, basically. And so the fact that we've never had to have any democratic accountability for the fact that we have, quite frankly, gone to war, it has not been put to Congress. Like that is the substantial, I think, democracy problem of this whole thing.
Which is what we say that we are upholding by being involved, that we are fighting for democracy, that we are protecting a democratic nation from tyranny, a nation that has had to resort to wartime measures that include vast restrictions on the press, et cetera.
Zelensky has made Russian speaking illegal in parts of the country. There have been all of these infringements on what we would consider to be fundamental speech and constitutional human rights, and that
which the U.S. has done, which the U.S. government has done during wartime as well, and I would have opposed all of those.
Correct.
Lincoln put suspended habeas corpus and all the rest. It's been an aspect of wartime policy in the U.S. to violate civil liberties to everywhere.
The McCarthy trials targeting and rounding up actors who you believe have communist affiliations, as though it's illegal to be communist in the United States. Although maybe we're heading that way with the Congress making public declarations against communism, as though that we're not allowed to have the freedom to make political choices in the United States of America. But it's also worth noting that just 6 days ago or so, Politico published this report titled "Biden Prepares Largest Pentagon Budget in History as Spending Cuts Loom," saying officials are very close to settling on a final top-line number for the Defense Department for 2024. This is a quote from Pentagon Comptroller Michael McCord. "I do expect it will be a bigger number than Congress provided last year." He declined to give details about the proposal because it's still in flux.
Republicans should say, hell no.
But he says that the Pentagon will invest in munitions to replenish U.S. stockpiles and support the continued fight in Ukraine.
Yeah, Republicans have to say no. They have to, walk the walk if they're going to talk the talk about controlling the deficit and controlling runaway government spending. It has to come down to defense spending as well. And there are many Republicans who are willing to do that. Senator Rand Paul has said, yes, the defense budget should be cut. So the Republican leaders who held up Kevin McCarthy's confirmation said that endless spending for Ukraine has to be scrutinized. Again, and that's something some Democrats have said as well. And it's clearly something the American people support.
And yet,
so maybe it's going to happen.
And yet, in
December,
December, lawmakers appropriated $858 billion in national defense, and that was $45 billion more than even Biden asked for.
How generous.
So again, when we say the blob is bipartisan, and when I resist the idea of reducing everything to I don't like Biden, so it's Biden's fault or whatever, this is a machine that's operating completely without Biden needing to be at the head of it. You know what I mean? Or any president, Trump or any president.
Which is what they were saying in that clip.
Yeah.
Essentially, they were saying they were saying, thank God, thank goodness, this operates without the actual input of Democratic forces.
I'm very interested to see what Republicans in the House do now. I mean, I often criticize liberals, Democrats, for saying they like X, Y, and Z policy when they're in the minority, knowing that it can't actually pass. And it'll be curious to see whether or not, still Republicans are not in a position where they can actually pass legislation. So they could posture and put forward, some resistance to this defense budget. And I don't know how much I would really buy into it, but they might even be unwilling to do that much now that they at least control the House. So we'll continue to follow how they play this, and we'll have more rising for you right after this.